Hi, thanks for joining us on this second round of Bible study. Um, I hope the first one was got you excited. We hope that this one will also get excited, that you will get excited in reading this story. It's a very familiar story of the prodigal son. And sometimes in familiar stories, we wonder what is something new that this can speak to us. So we kind of go to this text with so much of apprehension. I just wanted to encourage you to read this text. And if you get a chance, and I want you to see if you can buy this book, not only if you are a group leader, but even if you're a participant in that small groups, if you can, the story is the book is an easy read. It's not very difficult. Tim Keller does a nice job of explaining this story so beautifully. He takes the time to kind of go through the text very well, and I hope it'll be and I found even if you are not familiar with the Christian faith, and if you're somebody new to this faith, and if you are trying to understand, so that's why he calls this book, and he says the recovering heart of the Christian faith. So this is story is so central to the Christian faith. And so if you get a chance, just buy this book, and I would encourage you to just read this book for yourself, because when you read this book and then when you come to this conversation, it'll be more engaging. And that's my just simple suggestion to you. If you can afford to buy this book and read it through, it'll really help you. Um, he starts off by saying what happens is in context is very important. Every time you read a story, the context behind why the story is told is very important. Even when we tell stories to our children at home, out of a context, we then tell the story. And so, what he's saying is in our session one, he kind of tells us that there were two groups of people that came around Jesus and they were hanging out with them. And so, the story of this, what we normally hear as the story of the prodigal son, arises out of a context. And so, if you have your Bibles with you, open with me to Luke chapter 15, and I'm going to read just the first two verses because that's the one that gives us an idea of who these two groups of people that came together with Jesus. He says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear him. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" So what he's saying, there were two groups of people that came around when Jesus was on this earth, walking around, telling stories, telling parables. And in our story, he says there are two groups of people. One is the group, what is called as the tax collectors and sinners. And look at the words that is being used. He says, and we're gathering all around to hear him. So it's not like they gathered around once, but they gathered every time. Every time this was happening, that they were gathering all the time around. So it's like this present continuous kind of a sentence. And then the second group of people is who he calls us as the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. But they muttered against him. So there's two groups of people gather around, and so Jesus tells this story. Now, you and I can immediately make the connection. In the story of the prodigal son, the tax collectors and sinners were the younger brothers. The younger brothers are the ones who kind of lived their life. They wanted freedom. They didn't want to be bound by the rules in the house. They went out and did the things. And what we will call that as people who didn't obey or did their things on their own. The second group of people are people who kept everything, who kept the faith, who were very obedient. And in the Jewish faith, if you look at it, they were the people who kind of held on to the religious moralism or the moral purity of this faith. And so they are the ones who kind of held the faith together. So Jesus is addressing to these two group of people. What he's saying that kind of throws like a curveball, what Tim Keller is saying throws a curveball is, oftentimes we hear this story and we tell that Jesus was telling this story to those groups of people, those younger brothers. The story becomes the focus of the younger brother. So probably we are thinking when Jesus is telling this story, there is beautiful welcome by God, and there is warm-heartedness, and everybody is in their tears when they are listening to the story. Uh, but what Tim Keller is saying is the story not only focuses on them, but also focuses on the older brother, which means the story's focus is on both the brothers. But most importantly, what he says, and I think that kind of speaks closer to our heart, is this one. What he is saying is he's not talking so much to the wayward sinners or the immoral outsiders, but he's talking to the moral insiders, the people who kind of held the faith. And he's saying that how he was talking to that particular group of people. What kind of kind of pushes that button for us is, he says, religious moralism, the attitude of the insiders, as a kind of a deadly spiritual condition, and that has to be addressed. So he ends off by saying that that the ones who did not that who kept the faith were the ones who were offended by this parable. The ones who were insiders, right? The ones who were doing everything were the ones who were offended by the parable of Jesus. And then, if you look at it from the other side, the ones who were estranged, or one who were living the freedom, the life of freedom, the one that they wanted to live, were the ones who were getting attracted. So in a sense, the ones who were kind of repelled by Jesus' message were the ones who were insiders. And the ones who got attracted to Jesus' message was the one who were the outsiders. And so he says, look at it. Every time Jesus told a story, there is always this comparison. And the guys who got excited were the ones who were very marginalized in the society. And so he says, both the younger brother and the older brothers lives in our communities today. And sometimes he kind of pushes this button on the church, and he asks this, the message that we are preaching or we are sharing, who is this group of people that are being attracted towards? I think what he says is that at the current rate that we are in, it is not attracting those who are on the outside. It continues to attract people who are those who are inside and who keep the faith. Now, what at the very end he kind of makes this statement, and I'm going to read that for you. And this is pretty powerful at the rate he's saying. It says, Jesus' teaching consistently attracted the irreligious while offending the Bible-believing and religious people of his day. He says that at the very end, he says, if the preaching of our ministries and the practice of our parishioners do not have the same effect on the people that Jesus had, then we must not be declaring the same message that Jesus did. If our churches aren't appealing to younger brothers, they must be more full of elder brothers than we would like to think. So that's the little bit of beginning, and you have a couple of questions that you can talk with your group, but that's the short version of it. And so I hope you will enjoy your conversation. Thanks again.